public meeting, development charges background study. We're fortunate tonight to have both Andrew Mirabella and Natalia Calbas from Hempson here to present the details of this development charges background study. This is a public meeting of council that's being held under Section 12 of the Development Charges Act 1997 as amended. And the purpose of this meeting is to give the public an opportunity to ask questions, provide comments, and make representations on the development charges background study and proposed bylaw dated November 17th, 2021. Council will not be taking any action this evening on this report or bylaw, and it will be coming forward to council at a later date, I believe on March 21st, council meeting or committee of the whole. So we are glad we have a couple of developers here tonight. Welcome to the meeting, and there'll be an opportunity after the presentation for comments and questions. So with that, I will turn the meeting over to Andrew and Natalia. I'm not sure which one of you will be speaking first or together, but the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you. My name is Andrew Mirabella, Senior Consultant at Hempson. We were retained to undertake the town's development charge background study and proposed bylaw. As mentioned in the preamble, the purpose of this meeting is the statutory public meeting held under the Development Charges Act. So I will do the first couple introductory slides, and I will then pass it off to Natalia to go through some of the technical aspects. And then we'll obviously, to the mayor's point, have some time for questions and comments at the conclusion of the presentation. So I will share my screen, and hopefully everyone see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So as I mentioned, it's a statutory public meeting. The purpose here is to provide the public with an opportunity to make representation of the DC background study and the bylaw that has been made public. Both the pieces of information were made public in advance of this meeting in accordance with the legislation, and proper notice of meeting was also distributed via circulation in newspaper as well as website advertising in accordance with the Development Charges Act itself. So what we're going to do today is we'll go through some of the background here. We'll run through the development forecast as it pertains to the DC study that we prepared. We'll provide a brief overview of the development capital program, and then we'll get into the maximum allowable calculated development charge rate. The rates that we put forward here under the Development Charges Act and the background study are what we consider to be the maximum permissible rates. The council has the municipality to adopt anything either at or within the maximum permissible rates. Then we'll get into the draft DC bylaw in terms of some of the considerations put forward within. Similar to kind of on the calculated rate component, the bylaw is the policy initiative of the council, and they have the authority within the bylaw itself to determine what the rates are and who is going to be paying the rates by way of the exemption list, both statutory and statutory exemptions. And then that'll kind of give a segue into some of the implementation options and next steps and where council decisions need to be made in that regard. So just as a very brief overview, we've talked about this times with yourselves. The town of Smith Falls currently obviously does not have a development charge bylaw in place at this particular time. Therefore, growth-related assets and any new infrastructure that's required to facilitate development is largely funded from your property tax base and utility rates, as well as any direct developer contributions as part of your subdivision. With growth occurring in the municipality, the town has initiated the study to explore the use of DCs, and with development occurring, DCs are able to be levied in the municipality. Effectively, the key requirements for a municipality to pass a new bylaw is one, the preparation DC background study, which has been done, the holding of a statutory public meeting, which is the purpose of today's meeting. And subsequent to that, if council chooses to, they can then pass a new bylaw, which would be the first DC bylaw in several years, actually. And the life of a bylaw is 5 years. Within that time period, the bylaw is in force unless council strikes it down, and they can provide a resolution to cancel it, or if they don't decide to renew it in their time, it would expire at the end of that time period. There's nothing precluding the municipality from within that 5-year time period updating the bylaw again or a background study to amend the rates and the policies within it. So just to give a bit of an overview of the process, and Natalia can pick it up after this slide. We start off with the development forecast. We look at the amount, type, and location of development, which really informs the growth related needs. So what infrastructure is required to service that type of development. That then looks at the capital needs eligible to be funded from DCs. So there's a series of deductions that have to be made in accordance with the calculations legislation that reduces the eligible capital cost. And that gives us our bottom box there, which is eligible cost for DC recovery. Those costs get delineated between your residential and your non-residential sector. Residentially, the charges are levied on a per unit basis. Non-residentially, the charges are on a per square foot or per square meter of gross floor area basis. With that said, Natalia, I will pass to you for some of the technical aspects.
Great, thanks very much, Andrew, and good evening, everyone. So what we have in front of us today is just a summary of the development forecast. There are further details on both unit breakdowns and more details on the housing and employment forecasts in the background study. But what we wanted to highlight is that there was a very slight decline from 2006 to about 2016. But since then, there has been quite a bit of growth occurring in Town of Smith Falls relative to the existing base. And as you can see, what we've highlighted here is that the official plan target, that is the current official plan target for 2031, will be planned to achieve in about 2023, which is a bit sooner. And then there's a bit of a tapering off of that increase in development, at least on the population side. On the employment side, what we've done is we've kept it somewhat relative to the population household forecast. However, we did deviate a little bit from that as we wanted to account for occupying of new non-residential space. And so with that, as I mentioned, the details on the forecast are in the background study, but really what we wanted to capture here is that there has been some development, of course, occurring in the town already, and there's some more development forecasted to occur in the next 10 years. And so on the next slide, what we have is a summary of the capital program. The first section of it is the general services, which includes library, parks and recreation, fire protection, police, and development related studies. And this is over a 10-year period. And the values here are in thousands. So if we're looking at the bottom here for the total 10-year general services, the net municipal cost identified is just under $6 million. However, as we go through the columns, there are a series of deductions we must make, as Andrew had mentioned, as part of the legislative process. One of which is accounting for any replacement or benefit to existing shares of capital costs. So in this case, what we've netted off is just about $2.3 million of benefit to existing costs. As you don't currently have a DC in place, there are no available DC reserves, so we have not made any adjustments for that. However, in the second last column, which is post-2030 benefit, these are costs that are above the funding envelope, which is calculated on the historical 10-year service levels. And what it leaves us with is the last column on this table here called total DC eligible costs for recovery. And this is what is being brought forward to the rates. So as you might have noticed from the 6 million in the beginning, we've come down to 2.2 million, which is eligible for DC recovery under this bylaw. And on the next slide, we've summarized the engineering services as well, just to make it a little bit easier to read. What we've broken out is any services related to a highway, which is your public works or your roads and related, and then the engineering works of waterworks and wastewater are on this table. The program is also 10 years as it is for general services. And the very last row here in blue is the total 10-year program summing both the general services and the engineering services. But really speaking to the engineering services here, of the net municipal cost identified of $11.3 million, the benefit to existing replacement share for engineering is just over $7 million. There were no available DC reserves as in general services. And in this case, we did not allocate any cost to the post-period benefit, as all the costs that were identified were related to the growth that is planned to occur in the next 10 years. That leaves the last column, the total DC eligible cost for recovery for engineering services at about $4.3 million. Together with the general services, the total DC eligible cost for recovery is just at about $6.5 million, again, over the 10 years. And so with those inputs, what we get are the maximum allowable townwide DC rates. On the table on the right, we've broken it out over 3 unit types, which is for single and semi-detached units, which the calculated rate is at $12,530 per unit. For rows and other multiples, that rate comes down to $10,000, just over $10,000 a unit. And then lastly, an apartment rate would be about $7,500. And the difference there is just based on the various occupancy levels of each of those units. So as you get into smaller apartment units, on average, fewer people live in each of the units. And the pie graph that you see on the left here is a breakdown of where the DCs would be going. As you can see, on the left side, the wastewater, water, and roads and public works. So the engineering services make up a pretty good chunk of this pie, well over half, as most of the costs that are collected for residential rates are going towards the engineering services. You will see that Parks and Recreation is a pretty big section, as well as residential development does place some burden onto the Parks and Recreation costs as well for the town, and then followed by some of the other services such as fire and police, which are smaller shares, but of course still important to the delivery of those services. And then what we have on the next slide is a comparison of development charges with some neighboring municipalities. We do include this, however, we want to make a few notes about it. This is a point in time survey that we do, since some municipalities are currently updating their DC rates. Those municipalities in Lanark County that have an upper tier charge, there's a county charge, we have included it in the total here. All the other municipalities don't currently have a county charge, so it would just be the lower tier municipalities. In the gold or yellow bar in the middle is the Smith Falls calculated rate, that $12,000 per single detached unit. And as you can see, there is a wide variety of rates on this graph. The rates do go quite a bit higher than $40,000 in units here in the GTA. But of course, we really wanted to focus on what would be more relevant to you. And as you can see with the comparators we put on this graph, you would fall somewhere in the middle of the group. And moving on to the non-residential rates. So these are levied on a per square meter or gross floor area of development. And it is a uniform rate that we are proposing of $78 per square meter. What you'll note here in the graph on the left is that it's a little bit different from the one we showed on the residential slide. And that is because there are certain services that do not relate to non-residential developments, such as parks and recreation or library. And so what you see here is that the engineering services now make up more than 3/4 of the pie, and most of the rate is actually based on those engineering services. And so moving on to the comparison slide, not all municipalities charge non-residential rates, but those that do, we've included on the list here. Similarly, anybody that has an upper tier charge, we've included as part of the total here. Smith Falls, as the residential rate, also falls somewhat in the middle of this pie graph, although as I mentioned, there are some municipalities that do discount their non-residential rates. And so they might either not be on the graph or be quite low. And so what we have on the next slide are some draft DC bylaw considerations. So the town's bylaw can have further exemptions than what is currently in the Development Charges Act. Those can be things like farm uses, places of worship, so churches and etc., hospitals and hospices, and as well as any temporary buildings or temporary uses. Those are typical exemptions that we see across many municipalities. Another consideration we wanted to bring forward to council is that DC rates shall, and it's in quotations, I'll get to that in a second, be adjusted annually in accordance with recent change in the non-residential construction price index. We would say the large majority of our clients would index annually, say on July 1st or January 1st, and that would just be to keep pace with the non-residential construction price index, as otherwise the rates that are set out in the DC bylaw would be frozen for 5 years. The shall can be changed to a more discretionary word, something like may. However, you would not be able to deviate from this set construction price index that is produced by Statistics Canada. What we will do as we have done for the DC bylaw, is that we've brought in any new sections of the development charge legislation. As I'm sure you might have heard us speak before, sections 26.1 and 26.2, which speak to the determination of the rates, as well as freezing of the rates for certain uses. We've brought those sections into the town's draft DC bylaw. And then lastly, the draft bylaw reflects the maximum allowable rates that we have calculated, and it would come into force upon passage of the bylaw. However, there is both flexibility on the rates, of course, not more than the maximum allowable, it would only be less. And of course, on the date that the bylaw is enforced, there's also an ability to put that date to be beyond the date that it is passed, so such that the date in force would be after the date of passage. And a part of those implementation options, as we mentioned, the rates that we're presenting here are maximum allowed rates that you could implement immediately after passing the bylaw, or council has the discretion to implement lower rates than the ones that we have presented here today. The development charges can also be phased in, so you could bring the rates up to the maximum allowable in certain increments over an annual period or another section of time like that. The one thing to consider is that this would be a loss of revenue that would need to be made up from other sources, for example, property taxes or utility rates. These foregone revenue cannot be made up from higher DCs on other unit rates. So you couldn't push the rates of one unit rate higher and the other one lower. It would either need to be a discount on the rates, and there would need to be a way to make those up through DCs. And then just on the last slide, we have some next steps. If there are any comments or questions from the public, if you could please direct them to the town through the clerk by February 7th, 2022. This would just give us enough time to provide any written responses to those submissions that are received. There is a staff report that is planned to be brought forward on the DC bylaw in late February or early March. And then the anticipated date of passage is March 21st of 2022. And that ends the formal portion of our presentation. And again, thank you very much for your time, and we're pleased to take any questions.
Thank you, Natalia and Andrew. So at this point, we will open the floor up to questions. If you have questions, please raise your hand, preferably through the chat mechanism. If you are watching online through Facebook, we do have staff who are monitoring the Facebook feed to see if there are comments or questions there. They will provide those as well to me. So scanning here, looking for any hands, any questions. Please bear with me if your hand is up. Got to you yet? Nadine, if you see a hand that I don't see, please advise.
So
I see Lindsay. Lindsay?
Yes.
Okay, yes. Lindsay, please go ahead.
Just would you be able to share, Natalia, your slide 8 again? I think I had a question on that slide. I just forget, and I'm hoping I remember by seeing the slide. Okay, yeah, I guess my only question would be is, so the calculation is where these funds would be applied to percentage-wise. So on a $10,000 fee, for example, water and services would get $800 essentially from that fee. Is that correct?
Yes, that would be correct. On a $10,000 charge, $800 would go to wastewater services.
Is there a way of this pie chart to add another section that development fees could go towards, such as creating an affordability fund or services? Is this pie chart something that can evolve Or does it have to be all the services? Do they have to be in there before the bylaws pass? So would council be able to add something into this pie chart that could receive a percentage of these new development fees?
So through the mayor, that's a good question. So there's very specific categories of service to which a development charge bylaw can collect for. And one to be infrastructure that's directly related to growth, and B, that it has to fall into the prescribed service categories that's outlined in the DCA. So I'm not sure specifically what service category or infrastructure that we would be putting those funds for, but it has to be directly related to a category of service here. Is, you know, what we see here plus a few other ones. So unless it falls into those categories, it can be eligible. But if it doesn't, then it would be ineligible from DC.
Well, okay, I guess for the members, go ahead, Sean.
Oh, you have a follow-up question?
Well, I was just going to suggest, I guess, for the members of council, I mean, I think that's something to consider, you know, these development fees, you know, because of our housing crisis in town, if there's a way that we can proportion some within an existing service or new service that could collect some of the fees towards them to go towards the development of affordable housing or something else. But I guess, Sean, I'll let you, I think you had a comment on that.
Well, I guess to the public tonight, as has been outlined here tonight, the process and the criteria, the qualifying elements of the town expenses are all very prescribed within the Act. And so the amount of DCs which have been recommended through the study are the maximum amount based on the appropriate calculations in compliance with the Act. That's the correct way of saying it, Andrew or Natalia. And so I think it's to direct funds elsewhere that other than where it's prescribed here would not be permitted under the Act. Is that a fair statement, Andrew? Natalia?
Yes, that's fair to some extent. I guess there's a couple of different ways. One, if the municipality is responsible for building affordable housing as a category of service, then we have funded affordable housing in DCs. That's usually mostly at an upper tier government level, and the relationship is usually pretty small and in terms of what's actually could be funded for DCs, because most of the need is actually being driven by the existing base. That's a more technical side of things, but if it is provided by the municipality and it's under their responsibility, then that's a category of service. Secondly, to answer part of the other question is that through the DC bylaw itself, the municipality can provide a discount or exemption for building affordable not-for-profit units under the bylaw itself. And that's also a common kind of bylaw and discretionary item that the municipality can consider through the passage of the bylaw to provide for those limited types of exemptions if you're building certain units and they meet the criteria for not-for-profit, and you know, it kind of hits all the notes of that definition, which we'd have to correct. But some municipalities certainly do that as well.
So to that, Andrew, will that form part of the end report to council?
It'd be up to the council's discretion if you want Henson to look at providing those types of exemptions in your bylaw. We can look at updating the bylaw to reflect that, and we would have to discuss that at the staff level as well if they want to put forward that level of recommendation in terms of passing of the bylaw. So if you want us to take that back, we can discuss with staff about updating the bylaw for passage for those types of exemptions.
Okay, thank you. And that's something we probably would have to have a council discussion, and perhaps that could be added prior to the final report being completed to a future meeting. Additional questions? Chris? Yes.
Through the chair, slide or page 7 of the slides, we see, sorry, keep going, next one. Sorry, I'm looking for the comparison of development charges. Yeah, they're right there. Why did we not put the residential tax rate as a factor in here also? It's amazing. You're going to say, oh, we're right in the middle. But when you compare our residential tax rates to all of our neighbors, we are so far out of whack. It's so distorted. It's amazing. I had a little back and forth with Janet today on this. The taxes that a person in Smith Falls will pay if they buy a Parkview townhouse, I had it at 600. They're going for $609,000 right now. So in Smith Falls, a young couple or retired people on fixed income would buy a townhouse at $609,000, and our tax rate, including education, the same as everybody else, is 1.8, I think, or 1.8%. So that works out to be $11,155.48 that a young couple will have to come up to with $931. Why are we not comparing stuff like this? Our tax rates, I realize it's completely MPAC's fault and we won't get to the proper tax rates for 4 more years, but we can't add a development fee on top of somebody. The problem is these people will be getting they'll be paying they'll pay $609,000, and that's what their assessment will be. So let's say in Carlton Place, I'll use Carlton Place for an example. They will pay, what did I calculate that? They will pay $7,300 a year or $609. That's $3,800 a year less, or $319 a month. How can we ask? And that's the problem. MPAC's not doing assessments right now. So this poor person that buys, and it's never been assessed before, a townhouse at Parkview, they're going to pay a ridiculous rate compared to our neighboring municipalities, and yet we don't seem to be aware of that. Andrew or Nadia is fine.
Yes, I think you have 2 questions there, Chris, and I'll let Andrew and Natalia answer the question if that factors into the DC study, and then we'll address the second question as well. So go ahead, Andrew, if you have a comment to make.
So through the chair, we're looking only at development charges, and this comparison is only looking at the infrastructure requirements and the cost of recovering that infrastructure requirement. Taxes are set obviously differently, and there's different competing interests with taxes, and it varies from place to place, and the assessment in each community is all different as well. So I can appreciate all those factors you mentioned, but the DC rates that we are looking at, and from a purely development charge perspective, would place them in the middle, irrespective to other kind of tax rates and other water rates that would go into the total mix of what a household would pay for services in the town. But development charges are in place only on the new infrastructure and the new developments, not on your existing base. So this would generate additional revenues for the municipality to pay for the new infrastructure, which is currently being subsidized by the overall tax and user base.
Thanks, Andrew. And Janet, are you available? To my understanding, MPAC is not assessing new construction at current prices, and I think there is some adjustment because of their still working with the 2016 assessment cycle, and taxes will be applied on a value lower. Can you please chime in?
Certainly. So as Chris had indicated, we are on a pause right now from the last 4-year cycle. That valuation date was 2016. The final one was in 2020. The ministry or the MPAC has put it on hold. Right now, we're not even certain what will be the valuation date, be it 2021, 2024. The province has not decided that. So it is on pause for 2022, 2023. Hopefully we'll pick up again in 2024. So you're right, any new builds right now are being evaluated on 2016 prices. So if someone purchases a $600,000 home today, that's not how the assessment is being calculated. Will it come to that point when we do the next one? Again, we're back to what will be the valuation date. So right now it is based on the 2016 valuation.
Sorry, through the chair. Janet, do we have any proof on that somebody's bought a house in the last 6 months one of the Parkview houses. So have we got a proof of what their assessment is? And how do we know what their assessment is? We don't know what it is.
I did a comparison for council and kind of broke down the valuation on starting with 500,000, you know, how many in the 400,000. The majority are within the 100 to 200,000. Some of them are in the 300 as well. There's only one property in town right at the moment that is assessed as far as impact over the 500,000. So that is going to change almost positively in the next 4-year cycle for sure.
Yeah. So to your, I guess to Janet's point, there is more parity, but council will have the opportunity to reduce the tax rate in the future as assessment values are adjusted to fair market value for everybody. Additional questions?
I'll have another
Sorry,
question.
sorry.
Oh, sure. Go ahead, Chris. Sure.
No, Janet, go ahead. Sorry, you're going to.
I just wanted to confirm the date on that was the 2021 tax roll, Chris, when you were asking, do we have any proof on the prices? So.
Perfect. Sorry, what was I going to say, Chris? I lost. I'll come back to you, Sean. I'll let Janet go on if I lost my train of thought. So.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No, don't be sorry. No.
Okay. Additional questions from anyone online here tonight? Let's see. Andrew and Natalia, I guess if the council was to not follow through with a DC bylaw, the additional 6.5 million that's anticipated to be covered from development charges would then have to be covered by utility rates and taxation. Is that correct?
That's correct. It would be continued through your existing kind of sources right now. You're currently funding the infrastructure through taxes, user fees, and utility rates, and that would continue in the absence of DCs.
Thank you. And a second question I've got, of the communities you have outlined here for comparison purposes, do you know if they have all charged at the maximum level, or was there a reduction from the maximum with some? And I believe some, as you mentioned, are probably around that 5-year cycle where they're updating their numbers as well.
So through the chair, we can speak to a few of them. We'd have to probably do some background research to see if some of them are phased in, but we do know the communities that are Ottawa and close to Ottawa are virtually at they've implemented kind of the maximum allowable rate. As we kind of move away from the city, there might be some counter phase-ins being brought in there, potentially more so on the non-residential sector. That being said, I can't say with clarity which ones have or have not. I'd have to go through the background study versus the bylaw to make that determination.
Thank you. Chris?
Sean, I remember my question. So through the chair, does the town need to prove that there will be growth in the next 10 years? That sounds like a simple question, but it's really not. There's going to be a lot of growth. And I shared this earlier that there's going to be 326 new apartment units built between now and 2023, which will probably be exempt from the development charges because the building permits will be issued prior to March 20 or March 21st or whatever date the first that you could come up. So does the town need to prove to establish development charges that there will be growth in the 2023 to 2030? I think that some of Hempson's or 160,000 square feet of commercial development it's not even in this realm. Or if you look at what was that study that we had done in November? It says that we have twice the amount of commercial we need. Other than Otis's Plaza, are we even going to have any development in the commercial sector? And to me, I don't think we're going to have the growth that they're saying. We're going to have the growth in the next 2 or 3 years exempt from development fees, but I don't think there's any proof that we'll have development to the level that they're predicting, anywhere near predicting. So does the town require proof to set a development charge?
Andrew, Natalia?
Through the chair, I think the tension here is that the municipality is planning for growth and the infrastructure is being in place to plan for the growth. And the official plan did identify growth of 20 some odd units a year for the foreseeable future. And since in the last couple of years, you've exceeded that, but we do anticipate that even if maybe this high period of growth, once it dwindles down, there will be still a continued level of development and development interest in the municipality going forward. And that's the relationship to the DCs. And on the non-residential side, it's non-residential is a little bit harder to fundamentally predict than residential, but it is capturing both not just commercial, but also institutional and industrial development that could potentially take place in the community as well. So, they, from a council perspective, they've expressed their intent for growth, and it's happened, and it's likely going to continue to happen. And that's why the DCs are being put in place, or presumably will be put in place in order to fund the infrastructure needs associated with it.
Through the chair,
And I guess,
is there an
Chris,
onus on the
thanks,
town?
my feedback as well would be, I mean, we would fit in the same category as every other municipality that has a DC policy or is considering it. No one can guarantee future growth, but obviously all of us are trying to plan and prepare. And
Do the
encourage
towns
growth.
legally need to prove that there will be development? That's the question. Increased development.
Well, the DC study identifies future growth, and there's plans for it, and your official plan plans for that growth. So that would substantiate the need for the DCs if the town chooses to implement the bylaw.
But you're realizing what I'm saying, the development, my 110 units, my 50 units on Ferreira, Lapine's 104, 132 units, the old medical center, Hammers and Nails, 33 units. That's going to be a lot of growth over the next couple of years, but I think you're going to drop back to 10, 15 units a year, which all of a sudden now you're going to put some other people at a competitive disadvantage at $12,000. Brockville just passed a new DC bylaw, and they're at $2,500 an apartment, and we're going to suggest $7,500. I think we're going to stall development in Smith Falls.
Andrew, have you got a response with regards to how, I mean, we are late to the game, I guess, with DC, so it's suggest compared to all of our peer municipalities in the area. And has there been any negative impact with development after DC policies have been brought in from your experience?
Yeah, so it's always a difficult one to balance, and certainly, we can't you guys in the same category as some of the fast growing GTA communities, and the evidence in those areas would suggest higher DCs also have the highest rates of growth, right? And I'm not going to suggest that always translates across the board in Ontario, but the market does dictate that if development charges are in place, but it's more of where people want to live and where the growth is occurring, and the market is driving the demand for housing units, not necessarily the DCs. That being said, the DCs do have to be taken into consideration in the overall grand scheme of it, and you don't have a current bylaw in place. And what we've set is the maximum permissible charges that the municipality could adopt, and it will be a decision of council to determine at what level do you want to implement the DCs and over what time period. But they're, from an overall perspective, the growth that happens in municipality is driven by the market, and whether there's a DC in place or not doesn't always really suggest that there's a direct correlation between a slowdown of growth once DCs come into play.
Andrew, I forgot my question. Sorry, I listened to you and missed my question. Okay, I'll come back. Additional comments or questions from anybody who is participating tonight?
CEO Morris has a question, Mayor Panko. Or his hand is up.
Pardon? CEO Morris?
CEO
Yes,
Morris,
go
his
ahead,
hand's up.
Yeah,
Yes,
thank
go
you.
ahead, Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I get the, the line of questioning about predicting growth. And of course, it's always difficult to predict growth. We base it on what we're seeing today and trends and so on. But I would add that the Otis development alone will add 57,000 square feet of the target, which I think Natalia is 130,000. I've forgotten the number in the projection, but one development that's underway or will be underway shortly will contribute 57,000 of that. So does that mean we'll reach the target of 130 in 10 years? Not necessarily, but I would suggest it's an indication that there is potential for growth. And
The
I
other
would add to
factor,
that. I would just add to that by saying that if the population growth based on the housing projections comes to fruition, then one would expect that would create demand for more commercial space as well.
Thank you. And Chris, I'll come back to you in a moment. But the other factors we have a Maple Ridge subdivision and of course Bellamy Farm, which I think combined are about 300 residential units as well, single family home, townhomes, of course. Go ahead, Chris. You have another question.
So Brian Otis's development, 57,000 square feet. That's wonderful. That's great for everybody. I've got 90,000 feet at Settlers Ridge, the old Target store, sitting essentially vacant. So we're at negative, what, 33,000 now? I'm not good with math, but I'm going to say we're 33,000 square feet behind right now. How does that help us? 106, their Hempson's number was 15,000 square meters, which works out to 161,000 square feet. That's the size of the whole Settlers Ridge Center. It's not fathomable. But anyway, we're still. It's great to guess that we're going to do this. So the 20 people that are going to build a house in the next per year, 10 years, are going to pay a ridiculous amount. I guess that's fine. Sure.
Thanks for your comments, Chris.
Mayor Panko, Lindsay,
yes.
Lindsay Blair has noted in the comments, she has her hand up
Okay.
still.
Go ahead, Lindsay.
I guess my only comment would be, just as someone who also builds in the area, I don't build single family home. I build multi-unit residential. Without development charges, and I'm not pro the maximum amount, but we do need something to help the town's infrastructure right now, which is not the nicest to work with in some areas, and maintaining it. And there is not a stormwater management system in place. And we have to put that on our own properties at the moment. And the suggestion right now is we could go to a max of 7,500, but I don't think everyone's saying we have to do that. That's just a maximum number. And I'm very in favor of fees being charged, not the max again, but something. And so I think, council has the maximum number, but looking at a progression, starting small, reevaluating in 5 years. And if we don't have further growth, maybe they remove it. That's why it's a 5-year bylaw. I have also developed outside of this town. And I can say, aside from there not being development fees, there are a lot of other things that do bring me to this town to develop. And I do not think you will be pushing people away in large numbers by starting to charge something. And if that's just my comment on this. I don't think the council necessarily is going to go the max. I think they should do something. And if in 5 years it has a huge impact and there's no further development, well, there's a tool in place. And that tool is to not renew it. But at this point, the town has not received substantial revenues that it could have received to further help the quality of the infrastructure and other services in the town. It does not drive all developers to Smiths Falls because we do not have any fees. There's other things that contribute to us wanting to develop in the town. And I'm sorry, but even if it's $500, it's not going to drive me away. I have to pay right now 18 grand a unit in Ottawa. That's pretty damn good. And I get the same rents in Smiths Falls almost right now.
Thanks, Lindsay. And I guess and I'll come back to you in a moment, Chris.
Mhm.
The challenge for council will be determining whether we want to implement a one-time charge, a development charge, or if as growth occurs, is trying to manage that growth through utility rates and taxes, which would potentially put pressure on utility rates and tax rates across the whole municipality versus putting a one-time burden on new development where the growth is occurring and supporting that premise and growth pace for growth. Chris?
So Lindsay, I'm welcome to town anyway, by the way. I think you did the project up on the top of Beckwith Street. The problem with everything is if you took an existing apartment building like the ones at Brockville Street and Toulon, they're paying double the residential tax rate. So in essence, the tenants, we talk about affordable housing, but the tenants are paying $300-400 a month in property taxes at those places because they're paying a commercial tax rate instead of the province in 2017 was very good to anybody wanting to build apartments. They actually said that the 10 municipalities have to charge at the residential tax rate. Well, I pity the poor people, the tenants and the landlords of these other buildings in town that are paying commercial rates and paying double the taxes that we are. We got lucky by the province. That's the only reason I'm building in Smith Falls right now is because the province said, Town of Smith Falls, you have to charge the residential tax rate. Otherwise, that's at 1.8% of your assessment. Otherwise, we would be paying 3.5%, and would be so far out of whack compared to all the other municipalities. It just wouldn't make any sense at all.
Well, Chris, I'm not commenting on tax rates. I'm actually just commenting on development charges at this point in terms of when you submit an application to add density to a property, that's what I'm discussing. And
Well,
that's where.
Yeah, you're asking about affordable housing. And that's, yeah.
If I let Janet answer, because she has a tax rate in front of her, and I assume, and the multi-res tax rate is significantly lower than the commercial tax rate. And I assume the assessed value per small apartment would still be based on 2016 valuations, but Janet probably is better equipped to answer that question than I am.
So I can confirm that he is correct. The new multi-res is the same residential rate. That's not exclusive to Smith Falls. That is across the province. I'm just trying to find my bylaw, and I apologize, I don't have it here. I can certainly come back to that and compare it to the commercial. Is that what you're asking me, Mayor Penko?
It's,
How it
Yes.
relates to the
I got it
commercial?
right here.
Okay.
Yeah. The multi-resident is 3.5%. The existing multi-residential. And the new one is 0.018, so double. It's almost identical to the commercial rate, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think commercial slightly lower. I think it's 0.32, but I just don't have it at my fingertips. But
Nadine, any other questions from either the Facebook feed or anything I'm not seeing here?
I'm just refreshing one more time, but I don't see anything.
Any member of council have anything they'd like to say? It's good to see everybody here tonight. Okay. So at that, we know the deadline for the receipt of written responses is February 11th. I think it was mentioned during the presentation. And those comments can be forwarded to yourself, Nadine, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then this will be coming forward to a committee of the whole in February. Now, to Lindsay's point earlier regarding a provision for affordable housing, or else more I guess, an exception for affordable housing. I think I'd like to have that come forward earlier before the final report, so council can have a discussion if they want to include that provision in the final report. So I'll just turn that to staff for making that happen. And as has been indicated, it's expected to come forward as a bylaw. If it's supported committee of the whole, it'll come forward for a bylaw March 21st. Any further comments before we wrap up? Well, thanks to everyone who participated, our development community and members of the public. And again, this I think is available afterwards online. Should someone have a chance to tune in. Okay. And since there is nothing further, I will call for adjournment of the meeting. Thanks everyone for your participation tonight. Oh, Councillor Alford, or are you guys looking for a motion for adjournment, or are you just like a comment? Okay. Thanks everyone. Have a good night.
Good evening.